Hi, I'm Nikos. I'm a cryptographer at Fireblocks. I'm here to talk about key extraction attacks in MPC wallets. This is a joint work with Oren Yom Tov, security researcher at Fireblocks. So, cryptocurrency wallets in 30 seconds. I believe everybody's familiar, but let's say it once more. So in order to spend Bitcoin, you need a wallet. That wallet holds a key. That key allows you to sign transactions. Those transactions you can broadcast to the blockchain, and everybody can verify the signature using the corresponding public key. What's the problem with this setup? There is a single point of failure. How do we address the single point of failure? We address it with MPC. So what is MPC? Wait. What? Sorry. So at a very high level, instead of having the key in one place, the key is split in shares. These shares reside with different parties. And the key is never assembled in one place. What does that mean? It means that through a key generation protocol, the parties calculate the public key, and then every time they want to calculate a signature, they run a different interactive protocol that calculates the resulting signatures for the desired transactions. So small aside, I probably don't need to say this, but I will nonetheless. So MPC is much bigger than threshold signatures. It is the crown jewel of modern cryptography. Basically, every distributed task can be solved trustlessly with MPC. There are numerous use cases. I will not discuss them. But what I will say is that commercial adoption has been somewhat slow. So MPC was invented in the 80s, and before the advent of blockchain technologies, the most significant commercial application that I am aware of is the Danish sugar beet auction of 2008. So in recent years, with the advent of blockchain technologies, MPC seems to have found its first killer applications, and hopefully there are going to be many more to come. Good, so we're not here to talk about MPC in general. We're here to talk about MPC wallet attacks, and we're gonna enumerate some of the possible outcomes of such attacks. So one possible outcome is denial of service. So let's say you and I have a wallet together, and I prevent you from using this wallet. That's bad. So a different MPC wallet outcome, attack outcome, is signature forgery. So maybe you and I have a wallet together, and I tell you, hey, let's sign this $10 transaction, and we end up signing $1 million transaction. That's also bad. What's worse is private key exfiltration, meaning that through regular signing operations, one of the parties in the MPC manages to exfiltrate the entire key, and then they can sign whatever transactions they want locally because they know all of the secrets. That's the worst outcome. So today's talk is about private key exfiltration in MPC wallets. Good, so just to have the same mental picture in mind, we have a bunch of parties which are shareholders in an MPC wallet. Each one of them has a key share. And in this talk, I'm going to assume that Alice is bad, either because she woke up one day, she decided to be malicious, or her identity has been compromised. And the goal of Alice is to exfiltrate her counterparty's key shares in order to obtain the entire key in the clear. Great. So having said that, let's move on to our findings. So we found 4 novel attacks affecting 16 vendors or libraries. We released 3 proof of knowledge, wow, POC, POC exploits, and we even exfiltrated the key from 2 production environments. So lastly, I just want to say that most of our attacks, so 3 out of the 4 attacks, are not implementation specific, meaning that we attack the MPC at the protocol level. Right, so let me just briefly mention some of the affected parties. So some of the biggest crypto wallets were affected, a number of crypto custodians, popular consumer MPC wallets, and also some of the more popular open source libraries. Good. So let's turn to our attack. So what did we find? So we attack the most popular two-party signing implementations based on the Lindell 17 protocol. The attack is a 200, what I call a 256 signature attack, meaning that the attacker participates in 256 signatures before exfiltrating the key. Okay, that's the interactivity required from the attack. We also show an attack on the most popular MPC signing protocols from the GG family of protocols, namely the GG18 and GG20 protocols, which require only 16 signatures in order to exfiltrate the key. So the attacker participates in 16 signature ceremonies, and after 16 signatures, he obtains the key in the clear. Finally, we also attack what we call a do-it-yourself protocol used by a crypto custodian. And this do-it-yourself protocol only requires a single signature to exfiltrate the key. Actually, it's less than a signature. It's the first round of the first signature. But OK, we'll discuss that later. Good. So that was the introduction. Now we're going to start with the technical details, and we're going to need a few items of background material. So the first item in the background is the math. Thankfully, no advanced math, no elliptic curves, or even abstract groups. The only thing you need to know is the modulo operator. What is the modulo operator? Well, simply, I will be denoting it like this, and it's simply x mod n is simply the remainder of x divided by n. Good. Next item in the background is Palier encryption. What is Palier encryption? What is interesting about Palier encryption is that it is linear homomorphic. What does that mean? Well, let's say we have two parties, Alice and Bob. Alice, using Palier encryption, can send the encryption of a number, let's say 42, to Bob. Bob, who doesn't know the decryption key, can operate on this encryption, and he can operate in a linear fashion, meaning that he can, for example, multiply by a number and add a number. So in this case, he multiplies by 2, he adds 100. Alice at this point can decrypt the resulting ciphertext and obtain the result of the operation without ever knowing which specific inputs Bob used. So if he used 2 and 100, or if he used 0 and 184. Good. So one important detail about Palier encryption, which we've already saw earlier today, is that it is parameterized by a public key n, and this n is an RSA number, meaning that it is the product of two big primes. And this detail will become important later on in the talk. Good. So final item in the background is ECDSA signatures. So if you're working in the MPC wallet industry, you know that the name of the game is ECDSA because it is used by the most popular blockchains. So in order to sign in an ECDSA fashion, first you sample a random number. This is usually denoted K, and it is usually called the ephemeral key. And then to sign, you simply compute a function of the message to be signed, the ephemeral key, the private key, as well as this ECDSA constant, which I will be calling L. This is the order of the group. If you know what it is, if you don't know what it is, it doesn't matter. Good. So that's ECDSA for one party. Well, what about two parties? Well, the idea that you probably already know is that instead of holding the secret material in one place, the secret material is split into shares via a key generation protocol. And then in order to sign, you can run another interactive protocol. So there are many in the literature. This is not an exhaustive list, but you use your shares and you run a protocol in order to calculate the signature. Good. Okay, so with that in mind, we can now dive into our first attack. I will show you how to exfiltrate the key from implementations of the Lindell 17 protocol. Good. So I will be sacrificing accuracy for clarity during this talk. Okay, so let's have a look at the Lindell 17 protocol. It goes something like this. There is a key generation phase where the parties choose random values as key shares. So that's x1 for Alice and x2 for Bob. Then, during key generation, Bob encrypts his key share under a Pallier scheme that he knows. So he encrypts x2 for a Pallier key that he controls, that he knows the decryption key of, meaning that only Bob can decrypt this thing, but Alice can operate on it. And this will be relevant for the signing phase. And the signing phase I will describe right away. So the idea is, using the ciphertext that Alice obtained during key generation, Alice will send an encrypted partial signature to Bob. The encrypted partial signature has this format, and Alice can calculate it because it's simply a linear function of x2. So I forgot to mention that I am using color coding here and for the rest of the talk, where red represents values that only Alice can see, and Bob represents values that only Bob knows. Good. So the only reason I am displaying this formula is to show you that we have almost all of the components of the ECDSA signature formula, meaning that we have the X's, we have the message, we have the ECDSA constant, we also have Alice's K1. The only thing that's missing is Bob's K2. So how does Bob contribute his K2 to this formula? Well, he does something, the following thing. So he decrypts the ciphertext that he obtains from Alice. He multiplies by his contribution to the ephemeral key, his K2, and he reduces everything modulo L. And of course, so hopefully this gives him an ECDSA signature, and he verifies that this is a valid ECDSA signature by running the verification algorithm. Why does he need to do this? Well, he needs to do this because maybe Alice, fell asleep halfway through the signature generation process, and maybe she forgot to multiply by her contribution to the ephemeral key. So what happens then? Well, what happens then is that Bob will fail to verify the resulting signature, and Alice will be notified of this, either because Bob tells her, or because the signature never made it to the blockchain. Okay? So what are you supposed to do in this case? What should Bob do in this case? Well, to answer this question, we consult with the paper, and the paper has this very interesting instruction. It says that any abort will imply no later execution, meaning that if you follow the paper to the T, Bob needs to stop signing with Alice. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, we put our adversary hat on, and we realized that this should give rise to a denial of service attack. We thought, this is Oren by the way, we thought that by compromising Alice and sending some nonsensical message to Bob, something that doesn't result in a signature, then we will force Bob to lock the wallet. So we sat in front of our computer and we performed this attack. And to our great surprise, nothing happened. We were allowed to sign again and again and again and again, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, without any reaction from the system, without any mitigation mechanism. So that was a bummer for us because we had to go back to the drawing board. But that made us try to figure out why was that instruction there in the first place? Why does the paper say you need to stop signing? Well, the paper is very clear why you need to stop signing, and it says the following. The only problem that remains is that Alice may send an incorrect partial signature to Bob. In such a case, the mere fact that Bob aborts or not can leak a single bit about Bob's private share of the key. Okay, so if we were to like think about, or if we were to take this observation to its natural conclusion, we could think of the following attack. So malicious Alice wants to exfiltrate Bob's key, and she does the following. She calculates a partial signature that fails to finalize only if Bob's least significant bit is 0. The signature verifies, let's say, which allows Alice to deduce that the least significant bit is 0. Then she does the same thing, targeting a different bit of Bob's key, let's say the second least significant bit, and now the signature failed to finalize, which tells Alice that the second bit is 1. Alice proceeds to target the next bit with the next signature, and 256 signatures later, she obtains the entirety of the key, and she can steal all of Bob's funds. I mean, the funds in the MPC wallet. Okay, so that's great, but that's a hypothetical attack. It's not actually spelled out in the paper. And that's where we had to think for ourselves, which is, not ideal. But so what we did is we had a long, hard look at Alice's partial signatures. So this is what Alice sends during the signing process. And we tried to, mess around with this formula. We tried to mess around with the X, we tried to mess around with the K, but nothing happened. We tried to play with the message, to no avail. But then the crypto gods smiled on us because we had the following idea. We noticed that by switching the modulus, so instead of using this ECDSA parameter, we use the Palais modulus, the public key of the encryption scheme. These two values are equal after Bob decrypts if and only if x2 modulo k1 is equal to 0. So what will I do? I will give it to you in a picture instead of showing you all the math. So the idea is that when Alice switches the modulus, when she performs this attack, if the signature is valid, she realizes that, x2 is divisible by k1, and k1 is a value that Alice controls. She supplied it to the MPC. If the signature is invalid, she learns that x2 mod k1 is not equal to 0, which means that k1 is does not divide x2. Why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting because already we have a way to obtain the least significant bit of Bob. Why? Because we can simply choose, as the attacker, k1 equals 2. In this case, we obtain leakage x2 mod 2 equals 0. And this gives us the least significant bit of Bob, because the least significant bit is exactly whether x2 mod 2 is 0 or not. Okay, so that's the first bit. What about the next few bits? Well, for the next few bits, the natural idea is to use the next power of 2. Meaning 4. In this case, we obtain leakage x2 mod 4 is equal to 0. So that's great, but that's great only if x2 mod 2 was already equal to 0. Because if the least significant bit of x2 is not 0, this leakage is useless because it would always fail. What we need to do, what we actually want, in the case that the least significant bit of x2 is 1, we would like to have leakage x2 minus 1 mod 4 equal 0. And in order to obtain this leakage, well, we just need to massage the algebra. We need to offset the partial signature that Alice sent by a value that depends on the bits that have already been leaked to Alice. So what's important is not the formula. What's important is that Alice can compute this formula because she has all of the values in the clear. Good. So to summarize, in order to exfiltrate the ith bit, you use k1 equals 2 to the ith power. you offset, I mean malicious Alice, offsets the partial signature by a quantity that she fully knows. And in the end, depending on whether the signature failed or not, she obtains the ith bit as leakage. Right, so I have a demo of this. It looks something like this. So the parties are running the two-party signing protocol. The signature in the end fails or not, depending on the bits of Bob's key share. And after 256 signature ceremonies, Alice obtains the Bob's key share in full. She can combine it with her own key share to deduce the key in the clear. Great. So that was the demo. So how do you mitigate the stack? Well, one way to mitigate it is, you can follow the paper's recommendations. Don't sign again after you detect a failure. Another way to mitigate this attack is by using zero-knowledge proofs. So let's discuss zero-knowledge proofs very briefly. So these are proofs that yield the validity of the statement and nothing else. For example, Alice can send an encryption of a certain number between 1 and 42. And she can also supply a zero-knowledge proof that the encrypted value, the plain text, lies in a given range, let's say between 1 and 42. So using, Bob, of course, verifies the zero-knowledge proof and is convinced that X is a number between 1 and 42. So using such a range proof, or a variation of this range proof, you can prove correctness of Alice's message in the Lindell 17 protocol and thus avoid the pitfall that I just described. Great. So that covers the first attack. And now I'm moving on to the second attack, where I will be showing how to compromise the GG18 and GG20 protocols. And the attack will require 16 signatures. Okay, so one thing about the GG protocols is they are somewhat complicated. So in the Lindell protocol, I explained it from top to finish. Here, I'm not going to cover all of the protocol because it's rather long and complicated. But thankfully for us, the attack occurs in the first round of the signature generation. Okay, the first round is called the multiplication to addition phase. And for the attack, and in this talk, I will only focus on this part of the protocol. So what is multiplication to addition? So we've already covered it in an earlier talk. So multiplication to addition is a primitive that takes multiplicative inputs from each party, so X from Bob and K from Alice, and spits out additive shares of the product. So beta for Bob and alpha for Alice. Good. So, of course, I got rid of the indices, but in the actual protocol, everybody has an X, everybody has a K, everybody has an alpha. But for simplicity, for this talk, I'm getting rid of all the indices. Great. So how do you implement this MTA, this multiplication to addition primitive? Well, you can implement it using Palier. How do you go about doing it? Well, you encrypt your K, and you send it along with the zero-knowledge proof that you encrypted it correctly. Also, the encryption is controlled by Alice, meaning that Alice is the owner of the secret key this time, as opposed to Bob as it was in the Lindell protocol. So Bob can operate on this ciphertext. He can multiply by his X, and he can add a mask. He also calculates a zero-knowledge proof that he performed all of these operations correctly. Alice, at this point, after verifying the zero-knowledge proof and decrypting, can output her alpha, which is simply X times K plus the mask, and Bob outputs his beta, which is simply minus the mask. And I hope you're convinced that alpha plus beta is equal to x times k. It's important to note that this mask has to be big. How big? Well, x and k are roughly 256 bits because they are ECDSA secrets. And the mask has to be much larger than 512. Why does it have to be much larger than 512? Well, it has to be larger because it needs to mask x. How does it mask x? We're going to look at an example of how it does that. I am using hexadecimal encoding. So let's say that x is equal to the number ABCD. I don't know what number this corresponds to literally. And the mask is something like this. So k is also another small number which is as big as x. And x times k is this value that I have no idea what number it represents. However, when we add the mask, then we are assured that x is hidden. And I will remind you that the end result Alice can see because this is her alpha. Good. So what happens if k is much bigger than the mask? What happens if k is as on the slide? So now the mask is smaller than k. So let's see what happens to x times k plus the mask. So x times k is equal to x padded with a bunch of zeros. And then when you add the mask, well, lo and behold, you will see that the most significant bits of x, the most significant bits of alpha leak x. Okay? And actually, there is no hiding of this thing. And Alice can recover x simply by looking at alpha. Okay, so great. So we have a way to attack this protocol, right? We simply need to use a big k. Not so fast. There is a zero-knowledge proof making sure that k is not big. So we are prevented by the protocol from using such a big k. What will we do about it? Well, we are going to cheat in the range proof. Let's see how and why. Good, so the range proof looks something like this. So it's a tuple of numbers. What they are is not very important for this talk, but there is a number that I denote z. And this z... There's... it's, okay, no, never mind. Okay, so there's a number known z, and z is calculated as follows. It's a linear combination of w, which is a random ephemeral value, plus k times a hash that depends on w. This is how z is calculated, and everything is modulo n, but the prover doesn't really control the modulo n because the modulo reduction occurs implicitly. Okay? So the verifier, after obtaining the tuple, which is the range proof, accepts if a bunch of things are verified, which we're not going to look into, and checks that z is small. And you will notice that the prover cannot make z to be small unless k itself is small. Again, why can he not do this? Because the modulo n reduction occurs implicitly. The prover has no control over the mod reduction. So by using a big k, you will end up with a big z. And this will be caught by the range proof. So what can we do about this? So let's think about how to cheat in the zero-knowledge proof. So we are going to try to adhere to this formula. Actually, we have to adhere to this formula because there are other checks that will prevent us from simply, let's say, sending z equals 0. So we will adhere to this formula, and we will try to zero out this part of the equation. So how are we going to zero it out? Good. So we're going to try to zero out this part of the equation. We're going to zero it out using Chinese remainder theorem. So here I am reminding you that n, which is the value that Alice controls, is the product of two big primes. And we're going to look at that formula through the lens of Chinese remainder theorem, which in a nutshell says the following. So if the formula, so the value that we're trying to zero out, is equal to 0 mod q and mod p, then it is also equal to 0 mod n. And this will allow us to send a small value for z, which will cheat the range proof and thus allow us to exfiltrate the key. Okay, so that's Chinese remainder theorem, but we haven't really explained how we're going to zero out each of the values. So for the first value, we're simply going to choose k equals q. By doing this, by definition, q mod q is equal to 0. Okay, that's great, but that's only half of the work. What about the second equation? Well, for the second equation, let's think of the following. What if the hash of w is a multiple of p? In this case, p mod p is equal to 0, and we will have succeeded in cheating in the range proof. Okay, but this is unlikely to happen organically. Like, what are the chances that a random hash is equal to a multiple of p? But what we could do instead is brute force w, because again, this is just a random value, a random ephemeral value of the proof, until we land on a hash of w, which gives us 0 mod p. Great. Okay, so we have a solution, right? We can just brute force the hash of w. So absolutely not. We cannot brute force such a hash, because n is a 2048-bit RSA modulus, okay? It means that p is huge. We're trying to brute force something that's 250 bits by brute forcing something that's 1,000 bits, okay? So this is not going to happen. But what if, instead of having two equally sized primes, the primes were unequally sized, meaning that one would be 16 bits, p, which we want to brute force, and we can brute force such a prime almost immediately. And the other prime, q, will be big enough in order to compensate for the expected value. In such a case, we are able to cheat in the range proof. But I know what you're thinking. Probably there's some like zero-knowledge wizardry that prevents us from using such a modulus. Well, it turns out that there isn't. There is no zero-knowledge proof checking for small factors, because the only thing the paper and the implementations check for is whether n is square free. We don't need to dive into the details of what square freeness means. Okay, but let's go back to the attack. So great, we have a way to cheat, right? We can inject this Palais key with unequally sized primes. Then we can put the bad k in, and then we can extract the key, right? Well, not so fast, because remember the MTA formula? It looks something like this. I will remind you, this is the alpha, Alice's alpha. This is what she obtains at the end of the MTA phase. In reality, there is a pesky modulo n happening there because of the Palais. So why it happens is not important. The point is that it's inevitable. The modulo n operation happens, and it happens outside of the control of Alice. So why is this annoying? Well, it's annoying because now k is almost as big as n. And let's see what happens to our leakage when k is almost as big as n. So here we have, again, we have our x, we have the mask, we have n, and we have a k which is almost as big as n. It's like 16 bits difference. So what happens to the MTA output? Well, it looks something like this, meaning that the most significant bits of x, they fall off a cliff, you know, they go bye-bye. In other words, the result only partially leaks x. It only leaks the 16 least significant bits of x. So because we are working in this like modular arithmetic world, the leakage we obtain on x by doing the attack that I previously described is only x mod p for a 16-bit prime modulus. Therefore, so we only obtain 16 bits of the key. So that's good, but it's not great. We want 256 bits of the key. What can we do about that? Well, what we can do is apply Chinese remainder theorem again. And I will, this time I'm going to dwell on it a bit more. So what is Chinese remainder theorem? So at its core, it's simply a way to encode a number. You can encode a number in decimal, in hexadecimal, in binary, in whatever you like. You can also encode it with primes, meaning that, let's say you have a number, x equals 23. If you know the modulo reduction for different primes, so let's say mod 3 it's 2, mod 5 it's 3, and mod 7 it's 2, then you can reconstruct x simply by using the remainders. So this algorithm is not magical. It has its limitations. What are its limitations? The limitation is that this algorithm will work, the reconstruction will work if x is smaller than the product of the primes. So in this case, if we're using 3, 5, and 7, we can only encode numbers as big as 105. Okay, great. So what does this mean for our attack? It means that if we get 16 small leakages, if we manage to get x mod p1, x mod p2, and so on and so forth until x mod p16, then we can feed everything into CRT and reconstruct x in the clear. Do you guys see any problem with this? Well, there is a problem because we only have the one n, okay? And because we only have the one n, we only have the one p. So it's not clear at all how we can use the same n to extract different p's. But what if, instead of using this handsome-looking n, we used this monstrosity of an n with 17 different factors, different prime factors? That way, we could iterate the attack for each of the p's and then apply the CRT reconstruction in order to construct the x. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, no, surely, no way we can use such an n. There's something like there's some zero-knowledge wizardry that prevents us from using such an n. Well, it turns out that there isn't such an n because the only thing that the paper and the implementations check for is square freeness of n, and I'm still not telling you what square freeness is. Good. Okay, so how do we extract x mod pi? Let's go back to our attack. Well, when n was equal to p times q, we set k equals q, and we obtain leakage x mod p. Now that we have the bizarro n, we set k equals n over pi, and at the end of we cheat, of course, in the range proof by brute forcing the w and so on and so forth, and in the end, we obtain leakage x mod pi. We do this 16 times in 16 different signature ceremonies. So in the first one, we learn x mod p1. In the second one, we learn x mod p2, and so on and so forth, until after the 16th iteration, we feed everything to the CRT reconstruction algorithm, and we obtain the output. 5 minutes? Okay, great. Okay, so I also have a demo for this one. It looks something like this. So first, the attacker chooses its 16 small primes, and then it starts signing. Okay, it signs with the first time using the first malicious K, the second time using the second malicious K, the third time the third malicious K. Well, the signing is really slow. It turns out that people are right. Great. So, and after 16 iterations, let's go. Boom. We combine it with our own private key, and we obtain the key in the clear. Great. So how do you mitigate this attack? Well, you need to add a zero-knowledge proof validating the well-formedness of Alice's n. Great. So with that in mind, and very briefly, I'm going to touch on the last attack without giving many of the details. I will show you how to exfiltrate the key from a do-it-yourself protocol that we found in the wild. Great. So this protocol is also MTA-based, but it doesn't have any of the zero knowledge. Okay, so Alice simply sends an encryption of K without any ZKP. Bob operates on it and sends it back. An interesting difference between this protocol and the one I mentioned earlier, apart from the zero knowledge proofs, is that the mask is now chosen as big as n. Okay, which means that what's inside the encryption is a one-time pad. So our previous attack is no longer valid. Okay, our previous attack will not work in this regime of parameters, even though there's no zero-knowledge proof. Okay, so what can we do about it? Well, it turns that we can do something much worse, because without the zero-knowledge proof, Alice can send something that's not even a ciphertext. Okay, because in the previous attack, at least we were sending something that's a ciphertext. For example, she can send the number 4. Okay, then using a suitable Pallier modulus, specifically one that is not square-free, Bob, by operating on 4, on the number 4, inadvertently sends back his x. So actually, it doesn't send it in the clear. You need to do some brute forcing, and there's CRT involved, and there's a bunch of primes involved, but everything happens in seconds. How does it happen? Again, we have a little demo here. So the signing already finished, and now the attacker is simply brute forcing each of the primes in order to obtain the private key. So again, you do one round of the MTA, you do a bit of brute forcing, you apply CRT, and you reconstruct the key in the clear. So it turns out that square freeness is important for your Pallier key. Great. So with that in mind, I will conclude. So what is the conclusion? I'm not sure. So no, but seriously though, I hope this is not the conclusion of my talk. I mean, I know this is not the conclusion of my talk, because these attacks, as well as other attacks that have been found, really I think they're problematic for the space, but I don't think they are particularly damning or anything. Mistakes happen in all fields. Things slip. Security analyses or auditing are not 100%. So I think we can do a good job. And I think initiatives like DeCompute' are actually a positive direction to solve these issues. So again, we need efforts to streamline and secure the paper implementation audit pipeline. We need more standardization efforts. And of course, we need better responsible disclosure cooperation. I think that the security field has experience with this, and we need to learn from it. And I hope, and that's it. There's a paper. I encourage you to check it out. Thank you very much.
We have 6 minutes on the clock for questions. 6 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. I see a hand up there already. Oh, one more.
Hello. These papers that you attacked, basically, they come with proofs, right? So, what are the implications for the proofs? Like, there are some issues with the proofs, or there is something in the model that's not been captured? Do you figure out?
So I showed 3 attacks on 3 different protocols. So the last protocol didn't have a proof. It was just there's no accompanying theoretical paper. Okay? Yeah. The first protocol has a proof, but our attack is out of scope, meaning that the paper clearly says, don't sign again. Okay? So, but we showed that if you continue signing after detecting failure, then bad things happen. And for the second protocol, there is a bug in the proof of the paper.
I see. So there are some cases that are some issue to do with the model as well.
Sometimes it's the model, sometimes it's the proof, sometimes it's everything. I don't know.
Yeah, got it. Thanks.
Okay. Hey, Nikos Oriol from Zango.
Hey.
One comment, one question. First, I wanted to thank you for your discovery. We were one of the affected libraries. Yeah. And wanted to say that you did a super job. So thanks for that. This is how we're getting better. I just wanted to ask you a question about the assumption of under which conditions this attack can happen. Does it...
The Lindell attack.
The Lindell attack.
Okay.
Does it require a particular set of environments so this attack can take place?
A set of environments? Like
So
also-
environment or access to certain resources, or does it assume that certain things need to happen so that attack is possible?
I guess, I don't know if this answers the question, but first of all, it needs to be an insider, right? You need to be a participant in the MPC. You need to be not only a participant, you need to be Alice, because Bob cannot attack. So
does that mean that you need an access to Alice?
you need an access to her
signing
share.
device to the
Yes,
share?
You need access to her signing device, her share, and you need to be able to send messages on her behalf.
So it's not like a systemic attack versus like an individual-based attack, right?
It is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's
Thank you.
I would describe it's an insider attack.
Got it.
Right, but that's what MPC is there to protect you against. Like it's not supposed to happen. Yeah.
Any more questions? One last question. I see a hand up here. Louise again.
Thank you for the presentation and the work as well. So in a previous presentation, Yash showed like this template protocol.
This what? Sorry.
I'm calling it a template protocol where you can
Right.
where you can choose what to use, right? Either Paillet or class groups or OT. Have you thought of maybe trying to generalize like your insights into kind of a template, a list of template attacks, so that you could kind of synthesize maybe
Wait,
a list
is
of
the
recommendations?
question whether the attack would be relevant for his protocol if you're using Paillet? Is that the question?
Kind of.
Okay.
Although I'm coming more from the perspective of asking if you thought of synthesizing your insights into what could be like a list of recommendations of what people should take in consideration, kind of a checklist.
So
let's make sure we're not making these mistakes.
It's a good question, and actually people have asked us, like they've approached either myself or like the company, asking us, what if we do this, this, and that in order to foil the attack? I think that's a bad idea if that's what you're asking. If we can like do, can we foil the attack by checking whether this is equal to that? I think it has to do with the security proof, like making sure that. Of course, you can have like rules of thumb, right? And like ideas that, okay, I need to check these things in order to, but they're more sanity checks.
Yes.
I think the more important bit is making sure that your protocol is secure according to a formal model.
Right. And just as a quick follow-up, do you think that if now you would look into protocols that would use, let's say, class groups?
Sorry, I can't hear.
If you would now look into protocols, ECDSA protocols using class groups or OT, with the mindset that you've learned with this work, do you think possibly there may be mistakes of the same kind that you could exploit?
So I don't think the attacks I described are translatable to the OT setting or the class group setting. At least, at least not trivially, let's say. But so I don't know. I do think that we need more eyes on not only the auditing but the papers themselves and what's out of scope of the security model, what's inside the scope of the security model. Yeah, but regarding like translating the attacks into other settings, I don't know, maybe, but I can't think of it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think from what I understood of Louise's question, it was more of a, can we templatize this? Can we give it a name? Said attack happened. This was its name. This was the setting. This was the architecture. These were the parameters that caused said attack on this paper of Lindell. I think it's more of an educational or an awareness, like a guidebook production than
like a
learning module. Like this has happened.
I see.
This is
okay.
it's like a case study, something like that. That would be very helpful because this
Right.
is so
Yeah.
new.
That can make sense. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for that.